Welcome back, warriors, to another high-jumping and fist-pumping round of the worst fighting game, the never-ending kumite to find the very best of the very worst, which is currently the sticky, grimy cartridge that is Pit Fighter SNES. This week, though, we'll be upgrading to the world of 32 bits, I think. This particular contender sure doesn't look like it, to see if it can take a swing and unseat our current king, and oh boy, it may have a decent shot of it. I can tell you that for free. Slam Dragon is a 1996 PlayStation button basher that I'm sure most of you aren't familiar with for a multitude of reasons. 1, because it's bad, 2, because it's obscure, and 3, because it never released in Western territories, which makes things a bit more difficult for me. See, aside from the fact that it exists and it plays a little bit like Virtua Fighter, that's really all the information that's out there, and believe you me, I've tried. But then I thought, perhaps this might play into Slam Dragon's chances of defeating Pit Fighter. You know, a mysterious unknown challenger from Japan stepping up and taking on the big bad? That's something, right? Well, we don't know for sure until we get Slam Dragon in the ring. So, as I said earlier, there's a bit of a passing similarity between our subject today and Sega's legendary 3D fighting series. But do you know what's better than a Virtua Fighter clone? Actual Virtua Fighter, and specifically Virtua Fighter 5 Revo World Stage, the latest and greatest addition to the franchise, which just so happens to be sponsoring today's video. In World Stage, a host of fresh improvements have been added to the already rock-solid gameplay foundation of VF5, including full crossplay between PS5, Xbox Series, Steam, and a Switch 2 version that's coming later, which will benefit from the even silkier rollback netcode, allowing you to take on challengers from across the globe. Speaking of which, an immersive new single-player mode, appropriately titled World Stage, pits you against dozens of CPU-controlled opponents in a massive worldwide tournament, with some being modeled after playstyles of famous real-life VF competitors. Along with new training mode and replay features, World Stage also makes the iconic end boss Doral finally playable through DLC, so be on the lookout for her chrome-plated fists. Finally, if you already happen to own the original Steam version of Revo, then you can upgrade to World Stage absolutely free. But if you're really feeling faster than lightning, then you can cop the 30th anniversary version of the game, which packs in a ton of costumes, music, and behind-the-scenes material. So if you're interested in proving that pro wrestling is indeed the ultimate sport, hit the link in the description and pinned comment below. Thanks again to Sega for sponsoring today's video, and now let's get back to, slamming some dragons. So this one is a weird little thing, a curious case, if you will, of a fighting game that kinda sorta was, but not really. First up though, the developer, which was called Pre-Stage, is almost as mysterious as this game itself. Before this, their only fighting title, they had put out a single Othello game and a Cho Anarchy side-scroller before closing up shop in 1998, meaning Pre-Stage only existed for about 4 years, which is not so hot. I guess their most famous title was Cowboy Bebop, which they co-developed. No, not the PS2 action game, but a bizarre space sim for the PlayStation 1 that I honestly didn't know even existed until just now. For Slam Dragon, though, several specific staff members joined the studio seemingly just to work on this one title before then moving on, and interestingly brought some tenuous connections to one of the most legendary beat-em-ups of all time. Yoshihisa Kishimoto, creator of Double Dragon, and Muneki Ibanuma, producer of Super Double Dragon and the Neo Geo Double Dragon Fighter, brought their expertise to Slam Dragon, along with more than a few obvious visual homages. Kishimoto is actually credited as the director of this one, and despite all the added experience he could offer, Slam Dragon is still a pale imitation of the type of high-impact action you'd come to expect from former Technos employees. Regardless though, in an attempt to, I guess, capitalize on the developer's notoriety and pedigree, Slam Dragon was at one point going to be released outside Japan, as evidenced by this advertisement for Bases Loaded 96, which touts that Shokendo will in fact be the ultimate fighting game, a task we shall see it spectacularly failed at. Now, as for why it never reached our shores, well, as near as I can figure, Jalico US, the ones advertising Shokendo, seemed to slow down, way down, releasing fewer and fewer titles as the 90s wore on. The other possible reason? Someone in the US offices actually played the game and simply said, nah, this ain't it. Regardless of the reason, it never saw the light of day outside Japan, but given that the fighting game genre was exploding onto new machines and dimensions in the mid to late 90s, what with more and more impressive sequels to Tekken, Virtua Fighter, Soul Blade, and Dead or Alive coming out one after the other, releasing Slam Dragon around that same period, frankly, would have been a waste of everyone's time. So let's get even more in depth on it! I don't think it needs to be said, but I'll say it anyhow. This has to be the most hideous looking fighter I've ever laid my eyes on. It feels like I'm taking an eye test, actually, and I'm failing at it. Going for a rendered Killer Instinct visual style in 1996 was already a bit antiquated. I mean, hell, Rare themselves were already abandoning the technique in favor of full 3D at the time. It's really a shame because Double Dragon Neo Geo, which released just the year before, had absolutely gorgeous sprite work. Now, if they had kept something similar to that, but upped the animation frames or implemented layered scaling 2D backgrounds, I can guarantee you would have aged far, far better than this. And while I get Slam Dragon would have looked a little smoother on the CRTs of the day, it could have only done so much, because at any given moment, every single character in Slam Dragon is a barely defined, gnarled mess of colors and shapes. Like, goddamn, I owe Pray for Death, Ragnagard, and Vicious Circle huge, tear-stained, heartfelt apologies, because none of them look this dreadful. Despite the awful visual choice, the designs of the playable cast aren't all that much better, as many of them define the terms milquetoast or generic. First up, we have Johnny, not to be confused with Billy and or Jimmy Lee. Then we have Eric Lee, Amanda Ryan, Paris Brown, Wang Lung, Genpachi Riona, and finally, on top of them all, Dick. Now, there is a final boss that really doesn't fit the rest of the roster, and that is X. No, it's not just a moronic name for a bot-infested social media platform, but for a weird green alien punk guy. If you actually decide to beat Slam Dragon's arcade mode, you can unlock him, but personally, I really wouldn't bother. As for the story, well, there isn't one. I mean, I really don't think there is. There's not a single text crawl or any endings to speak of whatsoever in Slam Dragon, so I guess we need to check out a Japanese hard copy then. Oh, right, well, I don't own one for obvious reasons, but neither does anyone else on the internet, apparently. I searched high and low. No one has ever uploaded the Japanese manual anywhere. There's nothing on game FAQs, fighting game wikis. I can't find shit for this crap. The best I could find are these two, I assume, poorly translated blurbs. Wage a fierce battle in fighting action with CD-rendered music and realistic characters. 8 fighters have taken to the fight and seek to confront X. Followed by A group of underground fighters throng in the dark corners of the city, launching bloody battles. Strong as they might be, they fear the cruelest fighter, X. With strong bodies and crafted skills as weapons, they launch intense battles to take down the mysterious fighter, X. And that's all we're getting. Now, considering there is a CG intro, little CG snippets of the characters doing poses on the select screen, and even little CG victory animations, why the hell didn't they include any endings? Like, even just a 15-second clip of a character punching something, stumbling over a pile of money, or making structures out of mashed potatoes. I honestly have no answers for that one. Now, moving on to the backgrounds, well, yeah, they are, yep. Listen, they did make a pretty good attempt at faking 3D here, but it doesn't really matter because these lack any sort of life. No animation, no background characters, no nothing. They remind me a lot of the stages from Rise to Resurrection, which is something I really don't want to be reminded of. Finally, there's the music, and yeah, it's fine, I think, but honestly, I really struggle to remember any single track. Oh, do you know what else is struggling to be remembered? There's exactly two modes in Slam Dragon, that being Versus and Game Start, and holy shit, that's it. I've pointed this out in dozens of videos before, but if you're fighters from 1991 to 93, yeah, I do expect a very slim selection of options, but this was 1996. Training modes had already been introduced, not to mention stuff like time, survival, or score attacks. Hell, technically, Cosmic Carnage has more content to chew through, you know, if you're into that weird shit. Anyway, the actual combat mechanics of Slam Dragon are bizarre to say the least, as it tries to marry 2D and 3D fighting games together, but in a way that will only end in bitter divorce. The active buttons you'll be pressing are kick, punch, and block, exactly like many of AM2's fighters, but there's also a taunt button, but it's not especially useful as pressing it just gives you a little bit of extra meter, but you also gain meter by just taking damage anyway. Now, you can taunt cancel certain attacks to then start others, which is certainly something, but I can't imagine you really needing to do so, unless there's some hot Slam Dragon action going down at your locals. The Virtual Fighter influences don't stop there though. Every character moon jumps, just like Akira, Sarah, or Wolf. Knockdowns take forever, in which you can then follow up with a powerful stomp attack or quick strike, and even throws are done by pressing punch and guard together. Special moves are also way more Virtua and much less Street Fighter-a. So instead of fireballs, sonic booms, or Tatsumakis, there's lunging kicks, shoulder blocks, knees, and the occasional uppercut. Let's go back to that meter situation I mentioned earlier though, because once you've filled these up, which doesn't take a whole lot of effort, you can then perform your singular super attack, one of the few elements which separates Slam Dragon from VF. But guess what? They're extremely frustrating. Why? Because I still don't know how to perform them! I've triggered Johnny's maybe a handful of times by mashing buttons, but when I try intentional regular motions of any variety, it just never comes out. Well, look online, you skeletal simpleton, I can hear you yelling at your screens, which I would if anyone on the internet had written them down. Again, it's not on game FAQs, wikis, YouTube videos, it just doesn't seem to exist. The other reason why they're frustrating though is because many of them seem to be unblockable in a ton but not all situations, and to add insult to injury, also do shitloads of damage. There's a few that have breaks in between the attack sequences, so if you're lucky you can avoid the final last hits, but in general, these moves are super unbalanced, derivative, and are in direct opposition with how the entire rest of the combat system is designed. Obviously though, as rough and as not well thought out as all of this is, it's still miles ahead of the 2-frame swatting of the air that makes up the entirety of Pit Fighter. Oh hey, speaking of rough and not well thought out, I said speaking of rough and not well thought out. Virtua Fighter was a pioneer of the 3D space. The heaviness of the characters, the fluid animation, the sharp and defined forms of each strike and attack, it all made perfect sense, and is why the formula went largely unchanged for the last 30 years. Slam Dragon, however, doesn't feel like that, as it's clunky, unresponsive, unbalanced, and just a chore to actually play. When you wind up on the other side of your enemy, your back is directly to them, and pressing attack doesn't reorient you like it does in VF, so you always have to manually turn yourself around, which is really annoying. Things routinely cross up or not cross up at random. Pressing the commands for certain specials is likewise incredibly inconsistent, and worst of all, damage or attacks like supers that are initiated before the clock hits 0 still count. So even though it looks like you'll win by timeout, if the CPU triggers a super before it does, you're gonna lose because you'll be then disabled from blocking. Everything is just so sloppy and janky, but this will result in hilarity and certainly some knee-slapping WTF moments, so that's kind of almost something. What we still need to see, however, is whether that something will lead Slam Dragon onto our tier list of tiers, so let's get this one over with. Honestly, what really lets this one down in a rare occurrence is the presentation. If Slam Dragon had better character designs and a traditional sprite-based graphical style with a healthy helping of story, post-match dialogue, and endings, I could see this being a janky but charming affair. But it's so ugly and bereft of charisma that its contemporaries, like Pray for Death or Rise 2, just take one look at this one and say,
"You made me look bad. And that's not good."
So with that, I think these dragons are going to be slammed directly into the close but not quite tier. Pretty appropriate given it'll now be rubbing shoulders with the likes of DBZ Taiketsu, another rancid, rendered rush job. I'm not gonna lie, this one kinda hurts as there was potential for Slam Dragon to be a half-decent fighter, given the on-paper mechanics and the talent involved, but that's gonna happen when you're on a quest to explore the very bottom of the fighting game lake, from which I regularly dredge.
The hell's a drag?
Ah, no, fuck off! I said dredge, not drag! So if you know of any other contenders you'd like me to throw into the ring next, shout them out in the comments below or enter the ancient temples of my social media. Until then, warriors, I'll see you next time on the worst fighting game.